Welcome back to Kentucky Ancestors. So Flatboat George died in 1814 without a will. Two of his sons, John and George Jr., actually took matters into their own hands and assumed the roles of managers of the estate to keep the large family operation running and producing a profit. But after George Jr.'s death in 1832, the remaining Mefford heirs filed a lawsuit actually in 1839 against his estate and their brother John Mefford. So the siblings alleged that their father's estate should have been divided equally among all the heirs, but since it was not, at the very least, they feel like they should have received portions of the rental income generated through slave labor and crop profits. The court case lasted several years, and our research team explored two very valuable pieces actually emerged from this research. First, it gave us a complete list of all of Flatboat George Mefford's children. So your next homework is going to be reading the names of those children. Kay, can you read those for us?
Among the many names listed are Sally, Thomas, Joshua, Nancy, Mary, Elizabeth, Lydia, Samuel, and Caleb.
So a lot of children, correct?
A lot of children.
Beautiful names. But one of the names that actually stands out on that is Samuel Mefford. So we identified him as your ancestor Andrew's potential fathers. So his name keeps coming up quite often. And second, it gave us a rare glimpse into the lives of the family enslaved by the Meffords for over 30 years, including their names Mary, her daughter Drusilla, and Drusilla's children, Jackson, David, and Drusilla. So, you know, when we talk about those enslaved families, it just breaks your heart.
Yes, it does.
And these are pieces of history that we rarely learn because enslaved families are not documented so well. So here we were able to find a lot of pieces of history of that particular family. But the lawsuit took several years to resolve, and despite the hope that the Mefford siblings would come to some sort of agreement out of court, the judge finally ruled that this seemed impossible and ordered the entire enslaved family to be sold at auction on the courthouse square in Old Washington on New Year's Day, 1846. And today, only the foundation stones remain of that building. But the dispersal records and case judgment of 1852 show that each of the Mefford heirs was awarded $11.70 from that sale. As a reminder from our previous video in Old Washington, the slave block where Mary and her family were actually sold was the same one that Harriet Beecher Stowe witnessed her first slave auction just a few years earlier. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
All of that history. And then, of course, it catapults us. By 1852, Stowe released her book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which changed how many Americans viewed slavery and contributed to the outbreak of the Civil War.
Yeah.
So before our final commercial break, let's learn how to research Kentucky's enslaved families with KHS's own head of Library and Archives, Sherry Daniels.
When researching African American families during the time of slavery, it's always a good idea to dig into the local archives of the area they hailed from. With every family, beginning the journey is the same. Record what you know from yourself backward, tracing family through birth, death, marriage, and census records, to name a few. For descendants of enslaved families, try to trace them back to the 1870 census, which was the first census that recorded those newly freed after the Civil War. From that census, you can learn clues about their location and potentially their neighbors who may be connected to the enslaver families. It is at that moment that your research should pivot into a pursuit of the enslaver families and their connections. Trace the children and their marriages as family members willed ownership of the enslaved to their heirs in the probate documents or gifted them to adult children upon their marriage. The goal of this research pivot is to track down documents that name those enslaved. As we just witnessed in this episode, the entire story of an enslaved family was outlined in a court document because the heirs were fighting over the profits earned from the enslaved labor. Without those court documents, we may never have known their names and relationships. Again, be sure to research family collections in local archives of the area, as well as church records, deeds, and supplemental records that may not be indexed, but require a lengthy examination. For those who descend from enslaver families, please look through your personal family collections. And if you find names of those enslaved, please consider sharing this information with libraries in your area to help those seeking their ancestors.